Okay, we've all heard this, right? Maybe you've even bought a plant because of it. The idea that a few leafy friends can purify the air in our homes, it's a really comforting thought, this simple, green solution to an invisible problem. But is it actually true? Can a simple houseplant really tackle indoor air pollution? In this explainer, we're going to dig into the science, the history, and the surprising reality behind one of the most popular wellness claims out there.
You've definitely seen lists like this floating around the internet. Blog posts and articles, all telling us that NASA, yep, that NASA, did a study and found that these specific plants are basically powerhouse air purifiers. You've got the snake plant, the peace lily, the spider plant. They're all presented like this NASA-approved prescription for cleaner air. And honestly, it's a hook that has sold millions and millions of houseplants all over the world.
But hang on a second. When you really stop and think about it, it's kind of strange, isn't it? Why would the agency that sends people to the moon and rovers to Mars be spending its time and budget on potted plants? To get to the bottom of that, we actually have to take a trip back in time. So our story doesn't start in some shiny high-tech lab. Nope, it starts in a world that was dealing with a massive energy crisis and this mysterious new illness that seemed to be connected to the very buildings we spent all our time in. See, back in the 1970s, the oil embargo totally changed how we built things. To save energy, we started making our homes and offices practically airtight. We sealed every crack, put in super efficient windows, and cut way back on ventilation. The problem was, we actually created a trap. We were sealing ourselves inside with this cocktail of invisible chemicals that were leaking out of our furniture, our carpets, our electronics. People started getting sick, and by the 80s, we had a name for it: sick building syndrome. And this is where NASA, of all organizations, became what one report called an unlikely leader in solving the problem. Because while we were dealing with sick buildings down here on Earth, NASA was facing a much more extreme version of the very same issue up in space. Just think about it for a second. A space station is the most sealed-up environment you can possibly imagine. Back in the 70s, on the Skylab station, NASA found over 100 different chemicals just off-gassing from all the synthetic materials they used to build the thing. This wasn't just a little unpleasant for the astronauts. For long missions, it was a huge health risk. They had to find a solution. So this invisible enemy had a name: volatile organic compounds, or VOCs for short. These are chemicals like formaldehyde, benzene, and trichloroethylene, and they're literally everywhere, in our paint, our glue, our plastics. A NASA scientist named Bill Wolverton was put in charge of figuring out how to get rid of them, both for us on Earth and for astronauts in space. And his idea for a solution? It was radical, simple, and, well, it was alive. And that brings us to the legendary experiment. Wolverton and his team wanted to see if nature's own life support system, plants, could actually scrub these nasty chemicals right out of the air. And the results? They were incredible. What they did was they took a small, sealed plexiglass chamber, and they injected a whole bunch of a specific VOC, like benzene. Then they just stuck a houseplant inside. And get this, in only 24 hours, the plant had removed up to 87% of that pollutant from the air. 87%! It was a massive success. It looked like they had found a simple, green solution to a really complex chemical problem. This quote from Bill Wolverton himself really says it all. This was his whole philosophy. He believed that to fix the problems we created with our synthetic, sealed-off worlds, we had to bring a piece of nature's own powerful, self-regulating system with us. And the results seemed to prove he was absolutely right. So that's it, right? Case closed. The headlines practically wrote themselves, the houseplant industry was thrilled, and this new piece of common knowledge was born. But like with most things in science, the real story gets a little more complicated once you step outside of the lab. I mean, this is the really important question, isn't it? Does that amazing 87% removal rate from a tiny sealed-off lab chamber actually translate to your living room? Can a few potted plants really keep you safe from all the VOCs in your day-to-day life? Well, here's a reality check. Modern health organizations like the American Lung Association are super clear about this. They're not saying don't have plants, but they are saying you can't rely on them to purify your air. So what's the deal? Why were the lab results so fantastic, but the real-world advice is so meh? It all comes down to the environment. The NASA experiment used a small, airtight box, no air moving in or out. Your home is a much larger, way more complex system. Air is constantly flowing through windows and vents, and new VOCs are always being released from furniture, cooking, cleaning products.
To actually match NASA's results in your home, you'd need a truly absurd number of plants. Some estimates say you'd need hundreds in a single room to even make a dent.
But wait, the story isn't over. Because what scientists figured out later is that the plant's leaves aren't even the most important part of this whole process. There's another, invisible hero doing most of the work.
The real magic is happening through something called biofiltration. It's not just a plant itself, it's the entire ecosystem inside the pot. We're talking about the huge community of bacteria and fungi that live in the soil and all around the plant's roots. These little microbes, they're the real cleanup crew. So here's basically how it works. First, the VOCs in the air get pulled down and stick to surfaces in the pot. The soil, the roots. That's step one. Then, in step two, the microbes get to work. They literally eat the pollutants for food, breaking them down into totally harmless stuff like water and carbon dioxide. So the plant is the host of the party, but the microbes are the ones cleaning up the mess. And if we go back to those famous NASA plants, this all checks out. One study on the golden pothos, you might know it as a money plant, found that certain bacteria from its roots were incredibly good at destroying formaldehyde. It just proves that this partnership between the plant and its microbiome is what makes the whole system work.
So now that we know the real power is with these microbes, modern scientists and entrepreneurs are taking Bill Wolverton's original idea and just cranking it up for the 21st century.
You've got startups like a company called Neoplants that are building on this exact idea. They're not just selling you a regular plant. They are creating genetically engineered versions that are designed to be way more efficient at grabbing and breaking down indoor pollutants. They're basically trying to close that gap between the lab and your living room by creating a superpowered plant.
Okay, so after all that, history, science, space stations, what's the real takeaway? What should you and I actually do to clean the air in our homes?
Let's just break it down nice and simple. Houseplants by themselves, they have a pretty low impact on VOCs in a normal home. Their real benefit is how they look and make you feel. A good HEPA purifier? Those are amazing at getting rid of particles like dust and pollen. But the absolute best, most effective solution for all kinds of pollutants? Just opening a window. Good old-fashioned ventilation is one of the best things you can do to just flush all that bad stuff out.
So here's the bottom line. Definitely buy the plants. Enjoy them. There are tons of studies that show they reduce stress and improve your focus. They make our kind of sterile indoor spaces feel more beautiful and natural. Just don't buy them thinking there's some magic force field against air pollution. For that job, you need ventilation and maybe a good mechanical purifier.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thought to chew on. The NASA study gave us this really compelling, scientific-sounding reason to bring plants inside. But even if that reason doesn't quite hold up in the real world, we still do it. So maybe the real question isn't just about what plants do for our air, but what our deep, instinctual need to connect with nature does for our souls.